time, and I was like, there would have been
We're going to get started with our next presentation. So we have Dr. Valerie Koenig, which I'm sure some of you know. She's calling in. And she's going to talk to us about agritourism, which I think is a great follow-up from Megan Jacobs' presentation. So here is the quick introduction for Valerie. Dr. Valerie Koenig received her EBM from Tufts County School of Veterinary Medicine in 2013 and is practiced in both dairy, cattle, and small animal clinical medicine. She has been a field veterinary medical officer for the USDA Veterinary Services for almost 4 years, and through this position, in addition to her regular duties, she has been able to advance VS's role in certain topics she is passionate about, one being to improve animal and public health and agritourism. From her days as a cattle veterinarian, she recognized the importance of the public having an opportunity to see agricultural firsthand, to better understand how food is produced and how hard farmers work to provide safe and nutritious products. Thus, she has sought to help these farms who are gracious enough to open their gates to visitors through leading a multi-year educational initiative involving everyone from the farmers and fair operators to public health to extension to private veterinarians so they can more safely be that shining light in their community. So with that, we'll switch it over to Dr. Valerie Koenig.
All right, great. Thanks so much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. It's always kind of strange doing a webinar, especially because you don't have that face-to-face interaction, but I'm really excited to be here this afternoon to give you guys this presentation. We're going to be looking at specifically, as mentioned already, an agritourism overview. So in today's presentation, we're going to be first and foremost defining agritourism as well as describing its growth, and with a specific focus on the goat industry as well. We'll discuss the risks involved, kind of a big overview of those risks as well as a little bit in detail. And then we'll talk about the risk mitigation recommendations, specifically the summarized key elements from the compendium, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is. And then we'll lastly discuss the key areas of the agritourism questionnaire and the whys behind this important part of the NAHMS study this year for the GOAT 2019 study. So first, let's define agritourism. Many of you, I'm sure, have either been on agritourism operations and a variety of those, as well as know kind of what they are, but it's important to define it for one specific reason in particular. So they're basically a specific type of tourism on any type of agricultural operation where the public is invited to tour a farm or partake in farm-related activities for the purpose of education, entertainment, and direct-to-consumer sales. Some examples listed here, certainly not an exhaustive list, and of course these farms may not always have livestock on site, but of course for the sake of this presentation today we'll be talking specifically with those with livestock on site. The really important reason why I wanted to mention this definition is because of this particular word here, the word invited. What we've come to find here in New England is kind of interesting. As more farms have opened their doors to visitors, some members of the public have actually just kind of decided that every farm is open to the public. And of course, that's not true. So it's important to define these farms as actually farms that reach out, do advertising and marketing to actually invite visitors to come to their farm. So why agritourism? Well, one of the big reasons for the farms is that they can market their products directly to consumers. This, of course, can be more profitable for them by selling either via retail or other indirect means when they sell it directly to the consumer. There's also been, of course, a shift in the mindset of the American consumer. They're a little bit more focused on looking at locally grown and or raised food and products, as well as sustainable food, looking at the practices that the farm partakes in order to be more sustainable, as well as good welfare. People are also looking at the animals' care and husbandry and looking how these farmers care for these animals. Consumers also value these on-farm experiences. They see them as great family activities, even educational opportunities for school groups and school tours, as well as just having that confidence in buying local, so actually being able to go to the farm that they're buying the product from. What's even more important of why agritourism has become so big and why it's continuing to grow is that because back in 1820, as this shows here, 72% of our nation's workforce was engaged in agriculture. As of a couple of years ago, the statistic shows 2.1% are engaged in agriculture, and I would say even less direct on farm. So there's really a very small subset of our population that has any interaction with agriculture. So people just want to know because they're so far removed from it. So in terms of some statistics here, this is looking at New England states, specifically from the NAHMS census data from 2007 and 2012 side by side here, and their percent increase. And actually 3 of the states here in New England actually increased well over 100%, which is pretty remarkable in that 5-year span. You also see kind of an increase not just in the Northeast, but also in the West. And what I think is kind of interesting to look at, especially when it comes to big ag states, so this little chart up in the upper right shows top states in direct-to-consumer sales in the millions of dollars. California, obviously, you'd expect that, but New York is actually second, which is pretty remarkable. And even the tiny state of Massachusetts is fifth, and Washington and Oregon also being in that top 10, which is quite interesting. There's also a lot of more value when it comes to these value-added products, so being able to process them and sell them as something different, not just a raw product, such as any sorts of, for example, cheese, butter, soaps, that sort of thing. And actually, 4 of the New England states are represented here in the top 5, which is also pretty remarkable. So to look at a couple of specific articles, just to kind of, again, get this little bit more idea of why it's such a growing trend. A couple quotes from this one particular article here is that providing a bridge where farmers and consumers can unite, agritourism is a way for people to experience life in the country and learn where their food comes from and how it's processed. So again, people can see it in front of their own eyes and actually look at it and touch it and talk about it. Also, these activities are not just leisurely pursuits, they also have significant economic impact on the farmers. It's actually really helped some of the farms in New England in particular really remain viable because they've been able to invite people onto the farm and sell their products directly. And this article title, as it says very succinctly and very to the point, is that it helps make small farms viable, which is very true. So it provides a diversification economic incentive for growers, promoting economic development, and even educating the public about the important contributions of agriculture to the county's economy and quality of life. And I think that last statement is really important as well in trying to show that these farms have a really important place in their communities and something that it really helps folks to see how much of an important place that farm has. This is a study that was done by Michigan State Extension that I thought was also quite interesting to look at because this looks at dairy, visiting a dairy farm and having people what their opinions were going into the farm on a survey and their opinions coming out of the farm of the same things. And what they found was that, as it shows here, 95% of consumers leave with a positive or very positive impression about animal housing, and 91 to 96% have high or very high trust that the dairy farmers will do the right thing in regards to caring for their animals. Now, this was a dramatic contrast to what the percentages were coming in, and it's something really important to remember that the visiting of these farms is so important for these members of the general public just because they, again, don't see these farms. They don't know what happens on these farms, so all they can really trust is the things that they read and or see in the news. So it just shows how important it is to actually get people on farms and see what happens and the amazing advances in agriculture and different technologies that have been able to make farming a lot more effective and efficient. So let's look at the goat farms in particular. So why goat farms? Well, there's been a lot of increased demand and popularity of goat products, so the cheese, yogurt, other products. And goat cheese sales have actually increased every year since 2011, so something that has continued to grow. The number of goat herds has increased by 61% between 2007 and 2017, so looking at the newer NAHMS census data that has been coming out, so in the course of 10 years. And the number of milk goats in the U.S. has more than doubled from 1997 to 2012, and even more so in the most recent data. Part of that is because here you've got a dairy breed that, again, you're able to get milk from, but you have much less space demands than you do of, obviously, of cattle. They mature faster, and you get more progeny than dairy cattle, or at least they do a lot better when they have more than one. So this is a bunch of different statistics from Progressive Dairy, but we're going to focus on a couple of different points of this. This shows the U.S. Census, again, that 1997 to 2012, more than doubling, and then adding in the 2017 showing 537, almost 538,000, again, jumping up in the course of 20 years by almost triple, so which is pretty remarkable. And then of the registered dairy goat breeds, I found this quite interesting that actually Nigerian dwarf is at the top with 30%. So when we're talking about space demands, what's even more interesting is obviously you've got your bigger milking breeds, but then you've got Nigerian dwarf, which obviously even less space demands and feed intake and that sort of thing. So wondering if that kind of plays a role in that as well in terms of that being the highest number. So now let's bring those two together. Well, agritourism and goat farms seem to be pretty common these days, especially when it comes to agritourism farms. Most of these farms either have goats as a pet or as a petting zoo part of it or as actually the working animals on the farm. And then a couple of reasons for this and why these are becoming so popular is that goats are less intimidating in size and thus really a little bit more likely for public interaction. They're not as scared, especially younger children, which may be more scared by an adult cow compared to a nice, cute little small goat kid. You have that increasing demand for goat milk and cheese, and again, bringing that knowledge from earlier about people wanting to know where their food comes from and buying local. So consumers want to see it and want to see how it's produced and see the animals behind that. And these goat contact-related public health events are pretty significant, and I think there's kind of, again, a combination of different things here. Perhaps a little bit of a greater risk to the naive public due to these more frequent and closer interactions, and perhaps especially with younger children. A little bit less frequently you're going to have younger children, you know, with calves and that sort of thing. So the snuggling with baby goats is something, especially feeding baby goats, a lot more parents would feel more comfortable with them feeding a baby goat than they would either a calf or a bigger animal. And I'm sure many of you have seen either on Facebook, Instagram, any sort of social media of how absolutely adorable is it that my toddler is cuddling with this little goat kid. It's just so cute, posting it, everybody likes it because it's so adorable. However, of course, this is quite a risky activity, especially considering the close contact and the fact that this child is within straw and this animal's pen, most likely. So the risks of agritourism. So how can it actually be risky? Well, there's a couple of different things. There's also risks on a couple different sides. So there's risks from animals to people. So obviously there's the physical safety potential hazards, so getting bit or scratched or kicked, but also obviously disease, pathogen, and organism exposure. Then also the risk to animals from people, especially as folks do not know necessarily how to interact with livestock and don't understand or know the husbandry of them. They may feed them inappropriate items, other things that potentially could be, you know, obviously scary to an animal, so spook them. They can potentially, you know, get stuck in something, break out of somewhere, that sort of thing. The big thing about pathogens being what we're going to really focus on here, pathogens can be spread in different ways, and there's a lot of different routes of transmission. A lot of people think of just direct contact, but of course, as many of us know, fomites or inanimate objects can serve as a place to harbor different pathogens. So fences, gates, buckets, equipment, all sorts of different things that may be touching the animals or in their environment. What's even more important to note is that visitors may not be aware of these risks. Again, without this kind of livestock and agricultural exposure, a lot of folks just don't know and don't understand necessarily that livestock and these types of animals just aren't people and people aren't these type of livestock. So it's really important to know the difference. But most of these visitors don't understand that necessarily. So just a couple of quick incidents that have occurred. This is a farm actually in Pennsylvania that thought they were doing a great thing and reaching out on social media to be able to have folks come in and feed these young goats and calves that they had just gotten in. But unfortunately, it ended up that hundreds of people that came to help out ended up getting exposed to crypto, and there were some cases of cryptosporidium. This is actually something that hit a little closer to home for us here in New England a few years ago. There was actually an outbreak of E. coli 0157H7, so a pretty nasty strain of E. coli associated with a goat dairy farm. There was actually 50 cases, 50, which was obviously a pretty remarkable set of cases, even considering that, you know, in years past, this farm had actually had pretty similar events and no incidents whatsoever. This farm unfortunately ended up going bankrupt as a result of this, which obviously was a real severe detriment to that surrounding community and for the farm for sure. So looking at some of these risks, there's obviously something that had to be done. So how do we address these agritourism risks? Well, some really smart group of people put together a compendium of measures to prevent disease associated with animals in public setting, which is that compendium I mentioned earlier. The National Association of State Public Health Veterinarians put this together and have updated it a few times. The latest edition was put out in December of 2017. And they're really distilling it down into two main topic areas: infectious diseases related to public setting animal contact, as well as recommendations for disease prevention, specifically looking at the farm recommendations and some other things specific to certain agencies and other folks that work with those farms. So in terms of addressing these risks, the compendium has just really done a phenomenal job at putting together thorough information, a lot of great references, as well as these recommendations. They really go through the process of understanding the risks to understand the mitigation steps. It really sets the gold standard for risk mitigation. A lot of folks use that document as really the one to kind of aspire to in terms of risk mitigation, as well as insurance companies even honestly using this compendium as something to write policies for certain farms, making sure they've got certain things in place as the compendium recommends. There's been a variety of farm-ready materials that are derived from this content from a bunch of different sources, from everywhere from Extension to other agencies. Informational handouts has been a key part in distilling that information down to some key points. And self-assessment checklists is some of the ones you see here actually from safeagritourism.org that allow people to walk through their operation, look at things that may be there or not there, as well as things to prioritize so they can look at changes to be made. So having the compendium as the gold standard document, I think it's really important to go through some of the disease information. So we're just going to go through some highlights as part of that compendium, just again to understand kind of the big risks. So in terms of just a quick overview, some disease pathogens or organisms are present in many livestock species. The perfect example is E. coli, which is present in pretty much all of our ruminant species. Some are present in certain ages of livestock. So obviously, for example, Cryptosporidia being more of a concern in dairy calves and even goat kids compared to an adult cow, for example. Most disease pathogens are spread when we don't even realize it. So these microscopic amounts can be really hard to impress upon people. Even though you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't go somewhere. Hand-to-mouth activities being the most common route, of course. But most of the time when you say that to people, they assume hand-to-mouth activities means, you know, a small child that's going to be sticking their fingers in their mouth, not an adult. One of the things I try to impress upon people really significantly is adults honestly do a pretty crummy job a lot of times of washing their hands. And when you think about, for example, water bottles this day and age, a lot of water bottles, plastic water bottles have gotten a lot thinner in terms of the cap, so there's a lot less threads on the bottle. So when you think about someone that didn't wash their hands appropriately after being in contact with animals, then they go to open up their water bottle, even if it's outside the animal area, and we'll talk a little bit about more of what that means, they can actually get pathogens or organisms that were on their hands that were improperly washed onto the threads of that water bottle and ingest it via consuming water. So trying to impress upon people that it's not just this, you know, classic kid putting their hands in their mouth, their fingers in their mouth. There's something more to it. There's different ways that that can actually happen, and it's not just children. The compendium also talks about key enteric pathogens in terms of their highest percent of human cases that they cause. So the four listed here, Campylobacter, Cryptosporidium, Salmonella enterica, and E. coli, S-tech, both the non-0157 and 0157. These four enteric pathogens, again, I'll kind of put pathogens in air quotes here, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But remember these four as we will actually revisit these in a few slides. So in terms of the pathogens themselves, basically splitting it up into two key pathogen groups is kind of what I've done a little bit in terms of the training modules for folks in different audiences. The enteric pathogens, mainly we're talking about bacteria and parasites, and your main exposure risk is obviously going to be through manure contact or contamination. So contamination of some sort of surface, not even gross contamination with manure. Even after it may have gotten hosed off, there may be bacteria or parasites that are still hanging out on that surface. For non-enteric pathogens, could be a variety of different things, some examples listed here. But your exposure risk is going to be a lot more varied, as there could be many different routes depending on the actual pathogen itself. And again, still looking at direct or indirect contact. And it really depends, obviously, on the system affected. So the reproductive pathogen, for example, would be shed in the birthing process, so you'd expect your exposure to be more so when someone is helping an animal deliver and that sort of thing. Some key points as part of that pathogen discussion. The components of pathogen risk is kind of multifold. So you've got the likelihood of exposure. So what's the likelihood that someone is actually going to be exposed? Say, for example, a reproductive pathogen, they're not helping with labor and delivery. They're not anywhere near those animals. Again, probably less likely of exposure if they're not in that environment. What's the infectivity of the organism? How significant of an infection will it cause as well in terms of its severity of illness in people? Again, the big key point here, not just manure contamination, is of concern with public health. There's actually a bunch of non-enteric pathogens that really can be of more concern. A real highlight one would be Q fever or Coxiella. It's something that's a little bit more ubiquitous in the environment, I think, than a lot of people thought before some recent studies in the last few years. Again, really important to understand where the risks are coming from. The compendium doing a really phenomenal job about that topic in particular, because it really helps to prioritize changes to be most effective. You really can't mitigate risk well without that understanding, and you also can't motivate people to make changes when they don't understand what the risks are behind that. A phrase that I'm going to address, which is, again, something I hear a decent amount, my animals look healthy. There's absolutely no way that my animals are going to make anybody sick. And again, that pathogens in air quotes, as I mentioned, pathogens to people are not always quote unquote pathogens in animals. They may be normal organisms. And so healthy looking animals can still make people sick in general just because simply we're not animals and animals are not us. They just carry different things that sometimes they're okay with that we're not necessarily okay with and can make us sick. So if you remember those 4 pathogens I mentioned before, so Campylobacter, Crypto, Salmonella, and E. coli, here they are on this lovely chart, which actually comes from a handout from the Minnesota Department of Health about safe interactions with animals at your agritourism business. They do a great job in summarizing the signs in animals and symptoms in humans for these pathogens. Again, these are the key pathogens in terms of number of human cases that they've caused, being the key 4. So for example, E. coli, really no signs in animals. It's going to be a normal gut commensal, nothing that's going to cause them any illness. However, in people, it can cause pretty significant diarrheal illness, as well as in younger children, even the potential for kidney injury, such as hemolytic uremic syndrome, and potentially even worse. Salmonella, you may see some signs, such as, for example, cattle may have a fever, diarrhea, and potentially even abortion. I've seen some cows, though, and I've done fecal samples and cultures on cows that have very mild diarrhea, and just absolutely the plate was covered with salmonella. So definitely not a slam dunk when it comes to signs for those animals. Cryptosporidium, of course, you may know that your calves have diarrhea and scours and likely due to something like Cryptosporidium, but they may not look all that severely ill, and Cryptosporidium is also a real big bug when it comes to it lasting pretty significantly and being hard to kill. Again, causing a real significant illness in people, especially diarrheal illness in young children can be quite significant, even life-threatening. Campylobacter, even though it can cause signs, is usually mostly asymptomatic. Again, a big issue for people. So this is something just to remember in terms of looking at these key 4 pathogens for people, just really aren't a quote-unquote pathogen necessarily in animals, especially in healthy animals and more adult animals as well. So something that's just key to remember. So now that we've kind of looked at the risks, this is the point usually, especially when talking to farmers and fair operators, they say, gosh, I am never going to let anybody touch any animal that I have that is ever around ever again, because there's too many risks involved. This sounds terrifying. Well, the good thing is there's actually a lot of risk mitigation recommendations out there that are quite good, quite feasible to do, and something that really can honestly minimize the risk and reduce the risk of people contacting livestock and actually making it a safe and fun experience. So what we're going to look at here is some compendium recommendations and taking a common sense approach to that, especially because here in New England, for example, some of these farms are quite small. They really don't have a lot of extra money or maybe no extra money at all to spend on improvements. So how do you make it make sense so they can kind of get the big priority changes for next to nothing? Of course, knowledge is key. So as the compendium talks a lot about is really just knowing all of these key points and understanding that risk. So knowing first and foremost who is at most risk. So there's 4 key age groups or folks that may be at risk. So 2 age groups, the younger children under 5, elderly over 65, immunocompromised, and pregnant women. So perhaps having that a little bit more detailed information for those folks, maybe not having them be in contact with the animals or maybe go into an animal pen, those are things for a farm to consider. Knowing how disease pathogens are spread, so which animal species can carry which pathogens can also dictate how are they going to get exposed to that pathogen, what activities should I limit or not allow. Also that stressed animals, of course, can shed pathogens in high numbers. We all know that quite well, and most farmers know that quite well. But putting that into a public health context that potentially they could be spreading a pathogen that could then contaminate the environment and cause people to get sick if they are in contact with that environment. So obviously heat can cause some stress, especially the summer months, big time for agritourism farms. Younger animals can be more easily stressed, as well as just being around a lot of people, especially if they're not used to it. Animal stress, of course, is not our vision of stress. There's definitely things such as being introduced into a new group of animals and a reestablishment of dominance and hierarchy, as well as even being with other species, potentially being stressful to those animals as well, especially in the setting of a petting zoo, for example. So a big key point of the compendium for risk mitigation is farm layout. They describe 3 key areas to really kind of delineate the farm into. The first in green here is this non-animal area where it's okay for people to consume food and drink. The second is in yellow, which is a transition area. So there's hand washing stations, for example, and depending on the flow, whether it's a unidirectional flow or bidirectional flow in and out of the animal area, potentially upon entry having a place for stroller parking, cubbies for people to put diaper bags, other things that may have food items in it, again, trying to discourage folks from bringing any food items in and thus consuming it there in the animal area, as well as key hand washing stations on the way out with signs. The animal area is shaded in red where it's going to be, having that animal contact, being in that animal environment, however that farm has them interacting, where you don't want any food or drink to be allowed and should not be consumed in those areas, again, because of the risk of having pathogen exposure. What's even more important to remember is that signs to designate areas are really key, because as nice as this looks on a diagram, there is pretty much next to no farm that looks this clear-cut when it comes to going in and out of an animal area. There's a lot of different setups of farms, and no two farms are alike, and so signs to designate those areas and barriers and some way to kind of get people to flow in a certain way is really important. So some examples of signage here, the ones on the left actually being from UVM Extension, the ones on the right being from safeagritourism.org. And some of them, I find it just to be really quite key to have simple messages, having sometimes even just encouraging things. For example, the sign on the left saying animals need rest too, no visitors beyond this point. Sometimes the just no visitors beyond this point sign really doesn't cut it. People kind of need a reason not to go beyond. So that's something that can be quite helpful. The sign in the upper right here, as informational as it is, one of the things that I will point out is some farmers have said, gosh, there's just no way I'm going to be able to put that farm up. And the reason is the sign up. One of the biggest things is that this contact with animals may pose a health risk statement on here sounds really scary. And a lot of farmers don't want people to then say, oh gosh, there must be something wrong with these animals. I don't want to go into this farm, go near these animals. Something may be a problem on this farm. When in actuality, it's just something as a general statement. So instead, there's some other signs such as this one here, just says reduce your risk. So making sure to wash your hands, no hand-to-mouth activities, and using special caution for those certain higher risk groups. So something that can be a little bit more tailored to the farm, as well as farms making their own signage sometimes based upon these. For that farm layout, staffing can be important if a farm is going to have more than just, the family that runs it, if they're going to have employees work there or specific to the agritourism season. Looking at the best areas to position staff. Are staff needed to guide the public? Are they able to kind of make that traffic flow work? If they're using tour guides, making sure they've got the right number of people to the guides that are available, as well as if there's no tour guides, needing to have that good signage and traffic flow and really needing to make sense for people to go in the way that they're supposed to go. A side note about staffing, in terms of extra staff and helping with farm animals, they really should not be allowed to serve food because of just, again, the concern of exposure risk and bringing that into the food surface area. Really should have designated certain employees for farm animals and farm animals only. For certain places that don't hire any extra folks, trying to make sure that the, the farm owner, whoever is taking care of the animals, is going to be changing clothes, going in between, wearing, gloves, that sort of thing, sort of protective clothing so they're able to, and of course, washing their hands before they go in to do any food service. Hand washing stations are also a key area for places to position staff. And in that diagram a couple slides ago, placement is really key. It showed these hand washing stations at the exit of the animal area. But they not only need to be in the exit of the animal area, but also near food service areas, again, giving an additional opportunity to wash hands, and of course, near restrooms. But it needs to make sense for visitors to use it, because if it's not right kind of hitting them in the face as they leave, if it's out of the way, most of the time people are going to avoid it. Some farms have mentioned before about, gosh, there's just no way I can put in a whole new septic system for hand washing stations. I've got no water over there. I can't pipe it in. Something like this is a great thing for these farms, especially because it can get moved, especially if they have a certain event going on that it needs to be in a different place. So it's got a water reservoir on the bottom. It's got a place for paper towels and soap. But you don't even need to have farms go and buy something like this. You can actually, some places have gotten pretty darn creative and created something themselves. Just using water fountain, water cooler containers, as well as even making a foot pedal at the bottom so they don't have to turn on and off a spigot. The key 3 ingredients to any hand washing station is paper towels, soap, and running water. If you run out of any of those items, especially on a busy day, they really just become ineffective. Paper towels being something I think is most important because of the fact that a lot of people, after they wash their hands, if they don't have paper towels, they may shake them off a little bit, but inevitably most people will then go to dry their hands on either their shirt or their pants. And of course, if they were just in an animal environment, leaning on gates and pens, touching animals, they may have just completely negated the usefulness of that hand washing. So important to stay stocked, regardless of how it looks. Visible to easy understand signage is also key in these areas as well, not only showing people where they are, but also how to wash hands. As I mentioned already, adults do a pretty crummy job, and sometimes it can be really helpful to make sure that people actually do a good job of washing their hands. As much as I'd like to say it is, hand sanitizer unfortunately is not a replacement for hand washing. Hand washing is not the same as hand sanitizer. As good as hand sanitizer does in terms of being effective against many pathogens and when used correctly and allowing that contact time, those guidelines really are not meant for livestock operations. Those are more so for healthcare settings. When you have pathogens in an animal environment on the animals, it can be protected on hands by oils from the animal hair coat, dirt, and other debris, and without proper hand washing, alcohol cannot penetrate through those oils to get to those pathogens that may be trapped underneath. So any hands that look like this, they're obviously grossly contaminated, but even if they aren't grossly contaminated, need to be washed with running water and soap if they've been in an animal environment. Especially when it comes to trying to get this point across, a lot of people want to use hand sanitizer because it's easy to use, it's easy to put up in multiple different places, but it's just not going to cut it when it comes to being effective at minimizing that risk of pathogen exposure and contamination. Some other key principles in that compendium is talking about livestock health. Of course, something that farmers know very well in terms of how to care for their animals, using those principles even more so in these particular situations, such as husbandry practices to decrease animal stress. So better ventilation, decreased stocking density, maybe looking at their interspecies housing arrangements if they've got different species of animals, and then looking at public contact areas. Is there an extent of public visitor contact? Should there be? With certain animals in particular, such as maybe your younger animals having a time limit. So maybe they are only open for people to see them in the, couple hours in the morning, couple hours in the afternoon, but otherwise they have kind of a quiet rest time. Also having documentation of treatments, vaccinations, other health events, being important for any farm, especially any farm that produces a food product, but something even more important from an insurance and liability standpoint, as a lot of these folks have, talking in some of the events that we've had, just really harp on the point that it's important for a farm to have really key and thorough records to show everything that they've done to ensure the health of their livestock. On-farm protocols is another point in terms of daily animal health assessments. Is there some sort of protocol in place for animals that are in those public contact areas? If not, working with a veterinarian to create one. If you don't have a vet, get one. Some farms around here don't have a vet, as some of the vets, private veterinarians, the conversations that we've had talking about some farms that, yeah, it'd be great for them to, get a vet on the farm, but they just don't see the utility of it. So working a little bit more to figure out how that makes, how that will work for some of those farms that just don't see the importance and getting them to see the importance. Removing animals with any diarrhea, respiratory signs, fever, abortion to an area with no public contact for obviously better care of that animal, but also removing them from an area so that they don't risk exposing people to a potentially problematic organism. So having SOPs in place to help with that. Is there an SOP for pen or barn cleaning? The key point here in reducing environmental contamination, obviously reducing that exposure if you don't have as much pathogens or organisms sitting on different surfaces. Is there a certain frequency? What product do they use? Is it effective for the pathogens of concern? What is the surface type? Untreated wood cannot be disinfected. So do they have painted wood surfaces? Is that something that they need to look at doing? And also educating them on the SOP purpose, because most of the time if you don't explain the SOP, yeah, it may get done for a couple weeks at best, but then that checklist that they've laminated nicely and put on the barn, wall or somewhere on a post in the barn to remind people to clean things, it all of a sudden just starts collecting dust and no longer gets used if they don't understand what it's trying to do. So again, education on that purpose is really important. As well as staff training. If a farm has staff working on the farm, they need to make sure that they understand just as much these different risks and why it's important to follow these certain protocols for the safety of people coming to visit. Birthing exhibits is something else that's talked about at length, as it's a pretty hot topic because it's just so exciting for visitors. They just don't, again, have that exposure, and they find it really exciting to see an animal give birth. But unfortunately, it can be quite risky for farmers. Some big key pathogens of concern, Q fever or Coxiella, as the bacteria name is, lepto even, and brucella. We can't rule brucella out, especially because we do have wildlife reservoirs of B. abortus in the greater Yellowstone area and with feral swine, B. suis. So it's something that could always creep back in and something to always be on the lookout for. But obviously being pretty important pathogens, especially when it comes to these type of exhibits. Also, there's just simple animal stress concerns. And talking to some farms, of course, as they know, it's a high stress period of the production cycle. and the potential for more pathogen shedding, and just kind of making it something as more of a spectacle in terms of having people come see it versus caring more about the animal in terms of the stress period, especially if they're getting moved to a specific area to give birth or even off farm. Something for these farms to think about and how they message to people about, trying to get them the experience through maybe videos, live streaming, something along that sort of line, but not having them actually in that animal area. This diagram to the right here shows Coxiella and how it can get dispersed, as it's actually spread through aerosol pretty well. So it's something important to think about, especially because some of these pathogens actually can be spread pretty easily, even in the vicinity of the animal birthing area. So the recommendations are to have no contact with newborns or birthing products, having a well-ventilated area if there is going to be some viewing allowed, and doing also thorough cleaning and disinfection after any animal gives birth in that area. So those are the recommendations, just an overview of looking at what that actually entails. There's a lot of different ways to make those recommendations work for different farms, and something that's been really kind of interesting in talking to these farms and just what may work and what may not work. But again, the big key point is remembering the risks and then trying to figure out what big priorities in different areas that people could go in versus not go in that may help to reduce their risk. I think one farm in particular that was really actually quite astounding is they had a new dairy farm with robots, an actual new dairy barn with robots, and they actually had a walkway that went across the middle. And they usually brought some tour groups in, and they would bring them through that walkway in the middle, which of course is right in the middle of the cow pens and can get manure splash over onto those grates, and as well as the fact that they can touch, those railings along that walkway that the cows are in contact with. Being kind of a pretty big risk, especially because there really was no other place on this tour that they would give around the farm that would be having that much contact. And so what they decided to do instead was actually walk people around the barn a little bit different way, just through the feed alley. And again, this farm only does, occasional tours. And that reduced the risk reduction with not having them go through that walkway was probably at least cut in half. So in terms of, again, their exposure to the environment, and that cost them absolutely nothing. And nor did it make any difference in terms of their tours. So it was pretty remarkable what a difference it can be when they understand the risk and how it can cost them absolutely nothing. They just do something a little differently. So there's a lot of different ways to do it and ways to think about it. So let's talk about the agritourism questionnaire. So why is this important? Why is it such an important feature of this study? So looking at applying risk mitigation principles, how well are people actually doing these? So kind of in the big key focus areas, the animal contact areas, where they are, and who can contact the animals. Is there any limit on what the people that are in contact with these animals versus not? Are there signs? What is the kind of stated farm rules? The food service area, where is it placed? And this includes food consumption areas. Picnic tables are the worst offenders. Picnic tables, a lot of times farms will place them in areas that is just wonderful to view it. So whether it's kind of overlooking a pasture or something along those lines, maybe some animal areas so that the parents can sit down for their kids to feed the animals. But those picnic tables are typically right in the middle of the animal area. So basically encouraging food consumption within that animal area, which is the exact opposite that you want to do. Making sure that food service area is not near animals, barns, or any temporary pens. Trying to impress upon folks that temporary pens that they may put animals in for a day or so needs to still be in that animal area. So what is the transition in between? Are they distinctly marked? Are farms putting up signs, barriers, that sort of thing? Are there hand washing stations, potentially maybe even an employee to supervise or at least being logical to use? And of these two pictures as shown here, something that is still seen on some farms, but something they were trying to impress upon folks that, again, this young child in this kid goat pen as well as this little girl holding ice cream and touching and feeding these goats really not being ideal in terms of reducing that risk and that animal contact. So again, trying to look at specific parts of an operation is what we're trying to do with this questionnaire, and looking at, for example, something that may seem pretty unexciting, not really of any significance, but in this picture here showing how the cars in the parking lot is actually right next to where the animals are, obviously looking more like a temporary setup, but you can actually have people come to the animals and go back to their car without any hand washing or anything in between, especially if maybe they forgot something in the car or the kid needed to go back in the car for some reason. You have zero hand washing in between, so really having no potential for risk mitigation between that, as well as the fact that a lot of kids get really distracted when they see animals, so the parents may not see signs even if there were signs there. In terms of food service, getting a better view for what kind of things should be around these, where these people are coming from in terms of did they come from a tour, what direction did they come from, is there hand washing stations? And it might be hard to see, but there is actually a hand washing station back here that potentially if they come from that direction, maybe that's in a great place. Again, something that a farm needs to think about in looking at these. So we're trying to figure out how well these farms do it. Something to kind of think through a specific scenario and kind of looking at this for what it is and trying to figure out exactly, is this okay, is this not okay, are there improvements? Some farms may set up a pen like this so that these goats are here for people to come see. You see these kids either petting and or feeding these goats. Some parents, watching and supervising. And then you have this table here with some food samples in pretty close proximity. However, there is a sign, so I'll blow that up so you can see it a little bit easier. It says, please sanitize hands after petting animals. So at least there's a sign when it talks about sanitizing hands. Again, we talked about hand sanitizer not being the greatest, but at least they've tried something. But my next question is, where are the closest hand washing and or sanitizing stations? Now, of course, a little bit hard for you guys to say back, but I will give you a second or two to look and see if you can find where that bottle might be. So if you can see a bottle here, it's pretty remarkable that you can see that, especially the fact that it's really kind of just a small bottle draped over the side of the fence. So this bottle here, also it's really not in a great place. You see this sign that's a little bit around the corner. If you kind of follow the direct line of sight from where those kids are standing to the front of the table, they may not go around that little corner of the fence to either see the sign and or the hand sanitizer. What's even more important to note is that parents may not be aware of all the risks. Again, remembering that they may not be aware that this is an issue. So again, something to think about in terms of, yes, this looks like it's set up fairly well, but again, the food service, the animal area, is really just not quite set up the way it needs to be in terms of the recommendations. So knowledge that we're trying to gather, some things that we're trying to better understand. One being, what is the knowledge of the farm operators and their employees on some of these topics and these zoonotic disease risks? What is their ability to self-assess the risk? A lot of farms, especially a working farm, they just don't have the time to assess these kind of risks. They just want people to come onto the farm to buy some products, and they just allow them to walk around the farm a little bit too, and they just don't have the time to assess it. Are they able to do so on their own? As well as risk mitigation practices that are actually being utilized. So with that compendium being out for a few years now, how is that being incorporated into these farms that run these types of operations? Do they actually have things like a hand washing station with some signage and in a place that makes sense for people to use? What is actually there? In terms of some outcomes and desired accomplishments, really trying to provide farms an understanding of their specific risks and risk mitigation measures that really make sense for them. Again, that risk understanding really leading to better risk mitigation, as that allows people to kind of think a little bit more creatively when they understand the risk of how they can actually mitigate it, such as that farm, for example, that just had people walk around the barn instead of actually through the barn and through the cow area. And understanding the measures that are implemented. Are they effective? Is there visitor compliance? Something that we're looking more into in this area this summer is how well visitors comply with that. The input from some of these farms, you may find that they say, gosh, yeah, I've got signs, but people don't pay any attention to them. So what is actually happening on some of these farms and how well is it being followed? Ultimately, the goal is increased safety and public benefit from these on-farm experiences, as they're so important, again, to allow people on these farms to be able to see where food comes from and to understand better how animals are cared for, especially this day and age. There's a lot of really cool technology that allows for better husbandry and care. Ultimately, all these things together really fit into pieces of a One Health puzzle. So that farm viability really relies on the success of many parts. The animal health and public health, of course, are intrinsically intertwined, especially on these type of operations, but even amongst the farmer and the different animal caretakers. But what's even more important to remember is that the farm health is really intertwined with both of those pieces, and for those to be healthy also helps the farm health. With these farms, they can't really be viable if it isn't for all these pieces fitting together. These farms need to be able to stay in these communities, and people need to understand the importance of these farms being around. Most people in New England get horrified when they see a farm selling off land and it becomes a condo complex. These farms aren't going to stay viable if people aren't able to see their importance in these communities. So with that, I will conclude for questions.
Anybody have questions? She should be able to hear us. seem like we have any questions in the room at this time, so thank you again for your talk today, and I'll be sure that everyone has your contact information in case they have questions at a later date.
Perfect. Sounds great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And real quick, we wanted to show you guys, so for our operations that participate in the agritourism portion of the questionnaire, we do have these signs that you can provide them afterwards. So if you have operations that that participate in the agritourism questionnaire, we'll have a thank you card for them that you can get them along with these signs. So we hope that there'll be somewhat of an incentive for them. It's a little different than what we do in some of our NAHMS studies, but we thought